although there were philosophers before the ancient Greeks, it's the Greeks themselves that sort of are viewed as kind of the beginning of Western philosophy. I mean, the Egyptians, for instance, knew the 3-4-5 triangle was a right angle triangle long before Pythagoras did. But it's attributed to the Greeks. So again, many of the ideas that kind of come up in Greek philosophy will have been discovered before, it's just that they wrote them down. So I figured that we should start off with kind of an overview of the historical background to these great Greek philosophers. We're going to cover three main Greek philosophers, Socrates, Plato and Aristotle, and just kind of to introduce you to their world a bit. So the world of Greece, well, ancient Greece, I mean, as Byron said, the Isles of Greece, where burning Sappho loved and sung, where grew the arts of war and peace, where Delos rose and Phoebus sprung. I mean, there's kind of been a sort of romanticising of ancient Greece in sort of modern times. They were viewed as very rational individuals and more akin to modern civilization than, say, the Catholic Church in the Middle Ages. And I think sort of this is an illusion. You can get this kind of idea that sort of Greeks are simply Etonians in togas or something absurd like that. I mean, there were poor people in Greece, but in general, most of the philosophers were at least reasonably well off, or they were capable of becoming well off. So these were sort of fairly well-to-do landowners sitting around discussing big ideas. One of the most interesting areas of Greek philosophy is probably the political philosophy, and that reflects the instability and the changeability of the region at the time. There were many different city-states in Greece, so if you can imagine, say, in the UK, there's like Manchester is one city and London's another. It would almost be like Manchester and London are two separate countries in ancient Greece. And so in Greece itself, there were sort of two big cities. There was Athens and Sparta, and there, throughout most of the golden age of philosophy in Greece, there was an initial threat from the Persians, and so the Greeks banded together to beat the Persians, who were kind of the big scary regional power that lived just next door. So there was the Spartans formed a league, and they drove the Persians out of Greece, but this took a long time. So first there was the Persians invaded, the Battle of Thermopylae, which you might well have seen in the movie 300, and a small bunch of brave Spartans. It's probably slightly more than 300 Spartans. I mean, there was over 3,000 Spartan slaves as well, but you're never told that. Fighting off against these big scary Persians, and they managed to delay the Persians long enough for the Athenians, who were the other great city, to get their navy together and smash the Persians at Salamis. And it's finally a decisive land battle at Plataea, which sort of saw the Persians driven out of Greece. And, you know, after this, well, everything was hunky-dory between Athens and Sparta. Well, no, of course not. I mean, there was internal rivalries between the Athenians and the Spartans. Spartan civilization was fairly strict, dictatorial. They had education for women, which is interesting. The Athenians didn't. The Spartans had a lot of emphasis on military discipline, and it was very hard to own money in Sparta. Everyone was theoretically equal. So the currency was like these massive ingots of iron that were virtually impossible to kind of carry around or to discourage anyone from getting rich. Whereas in Athens you could get slaves, you could get good literature, you could have amazingly beautiful and ornate temples. It was, you know, it's basically the contrast almost in the modern day between, say, communist Russia and capitalist America. So this is sort of the background out of which many of the great philosophical ideas of the Greeks were coming out, and most of them came out of Athens, which was, as you can probably tell, the more kind of city with time for leisure. Athens itself, however, didn't do great throughout this whole period. Shortly after 450 and the Peace of Callias, there were some disastrous Athenian campaigns against the Egyptians and the Persians, and Athens had almost created its own sort of mini-empire that started to crumble against the Spartans, and the Spartans ended up beating the Athenians and imposing a dictatorship known as the 30 Tyrants. and that feeds into Plato, who's the second philosopher. We'll discuss. But first, let's turn to Socrates, who is Plato's mentor and teacher.